Well, hey teachers, in the last video I talked about how I introduced the sourcing skill to my students, and this will be a skill they very much need to know for their DBQs. So now that it's introduced, let's get into the basics of how to apply that to actual historical documents. So as I said before, sourcing is one of the most difficult things students are required to do in writing their DBQs. It's true, complexity is definitely the point most students miss, but I conducted a non-scientific straw poll with myself, and I'd say sourcing is the next most missed point on the DBQ. So what I do to help my students learn how to do this is to give them a formula to follow, and for many of them it really helps. But first let me show you why, in my experience, students miss this point so often. So recall that in order to earn the sourcing point on the DBQ, students are required to explain a document's historical situation, audience, purpose, or point of view. And they have to do that for at least 3 documents. And we've got to be clear with them, they don't have to do all 4 skills on the 3 documents, they only have to do 1 per document. And the next question is, well, which one? And my response is, it's up to you. So at that point, I can introduce the first reason that students miss this point, namely because they choose the harder sourcing skills. Now, of course, this is very subjective and you might disagree with me, but as I've attended the reading in June and scored thousands of these essays, here's my opinion. If students are going to source correctly, they most often do it with historical context. So that suggests to me that it's the easiest, or at least it's the one that makes the most sense to the students. So for my students, my solution here is, when in doubt, source for historical context. Now let me hasten to add that I know some documents fit better with certain sourcing skills, that's absolutely true, but if my student is having trouble with sourcing, I tell them go find the ones that require historical context and just do that. The second reason students often miss this point is because they don't understand what the skill requires. This is especially true of audience, purpose, and point of view. For audience, students just want to say that this was written to X, and half the time the information is already in the source itself. For purpose, they're often just summarizing the contents of the document. For point of view, which I consider to be the hardest of the sourcing skills, students will often go for bias, and that's not necessarily wrong, but demonstrating bias is difficult and they're usually not successful. So my solution here is to give them sentence stems that can help them understand how to begin their sourcing. And I've got a tool that I give them that's linked in the description in case you want to use it, so I'll just show you a couple examples here. And seriously, I've found that this kind of formula helps them so much. So if they're going to source for a historical situation, for example, they need first to perform the basics of argumentation with the document. What does the document say? How does it support your argument? And then they begin the next sentence with, this document was written during, or in the context of. Then they explain the historical context in 1 sentence, and then they need to write 1 more sentence about why this matters to the argument. Now to be clear, adequate sourcing can be done in 1 sentence, that's totally fine. However, I break it up into 2 sentences for them just so that they get it down. And it's that second sentence that leads me to the next point. The third reason, and this is probably the most widespread reason of them all, the third reason that students miss their sourcing point is because they do not show why what they just said is significant to their argument. That's why the why in happy is so significant. They always have to go 1 step further and demonstrate why their sourcing is significant to their argument. And for this formula, I just reach back to the old faithful. The beginning of that next sentence should begin with, this shows or this demonstrates, and then they show how the context connects to their argument. And you can look at the rest of the document for yourself, but I've found that especially when we're in the beginning stages of sourcing, this document is worth its weight in gold for students. And I make sure to tell them you don't have to use any of these stems if they don't make sense, but a lot of them will, and a lot of them will find it useful. Okay, I hope that helped you, and you can click the link below if you want to grab that sourcing skills document, and you'll also find links to my teacher resources for APUSH and AP World as well. If you want me to keep making these videos, then you can let me know that by subscribing. Heimler out.